Welcome, everybody, to the show. Today, we are talking business. This is not about business, this is education, but maybe it's relevant to our world, Jacob. The issue of business management, how to manage people. Would you say students are people?
Sometimes.
Kind of. Yeah. Today, with us, joining us and talking the book, The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker, is our brother, Cris Aguilar. Cris, how are you this lovely day?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
And I know you've looked at this book before, as have I. And I remember reading it a few years ago and thinking, this is good for teachers. And because we manage people. And it's also good in the sense that we can reflect on our own admin, maybe more intelligently. So I want to ask you what you find very interesting about this book. I just want to give a little backdrop of Peter Drucker. He was born in Austria. He spent a lot of time in various fields, including insurance companies and banking. And this book came out in 1967. And this, even though he spent his time in various organizations and things, his chief work in his life was on human beings, relationships among human beings, as opposed to the crunching of numbers, as opposed to the cold facts. How do we get from here to there in businesses? But I think it's very relevant. And even though it was written in 1967, I think it stands today. We could read it today. It's probably had a couple of updates since its time, so it doesn't feel dated at all. And before I ask you, Cris, what strikes you about the book most, I do want to point out that what I appreciate about this idea of what an effective executive is. Have you ever thought about this idea of, I like my boss, but I don't know why? Like, I know he's a good boss. I know she's a good boss, but I'm not totally sure why. Because we've had bosses that were very motivational and we thought they were good. But we've also had bosses that were not rah-rah and we liked them for that. They were not motivational. And he kind of crystallizes, well, what we've seen, the most effective executives, we kind of distilled it to this. I just want to read real briefly from the book that I thought was very interesting, how it opens. First few pages, it says, among the effective executives I have known and worked with, there are extroverts and aloof, retiring men, some even morbidly shy. Some are eccentric, others painfully conformist. Some are fat and some are lean. Some are worriers, some are relaxed. Some drink quite heavily. Others are total abstainers. Some are men of great charm and women of great charm. They need to edit that for the times.
Amen.
Men of great charm and warmth. Some have no personality at all and are like frozen mackerel. And he says some are colorless men who would attract no attention in the crowd. But this is what they do. And I love how he opens in chapter 2 on what the first thing not opens, right? But in the next thing he talks about is more specifically what all effective executives do. But I'm going to be quiet for the moment. Cris, what are your thoughts?
Well, I appreciate being here. And I would say that there's like a flood of thoughts that come in as you read that. One of which is a question kind of for Jake is, do you remember, Jake, me asking you years ago, like 3 or 4, 5, 6 years, long time ago, about being a level 5 leader and how I thought maybe you were level 4 and that you could be a level 5, which is the very top leader. Do you ever remember me talking to you about that, Jake?
I do. It's been a while. That rings a bell.
Yeah, that comes from a book, a huge fan of Drucker's, Jim Collins, and so if you read any of Jim Collins' books, you kind of get this idea that he is basically regurgitating a lot of Drucker's stuff. But But as I've read more and more and more books on self-help, business, and all that kind of stuff, they all are pulling from Drucker. It's almost every single book I'm realizing it comes from Drucker. Drucker is dated, like you said, Ruben. It was written, I thought it was in 65 or 66, but you're saying 67. So way back then, before we were born. And then you, of course, some of the thoughts, Ruben, as you asked me that question, what I think is, it reminds me a lot of, once again, of our father. It was constantly preaching some of these things to us. And he was a big Jim Collins fan. I'm not too sure if he was a Drucker fan, but he definitely was a Jim Collins fan. And so anyway, all that to say is, I would definitely recommend any of Jim Collins' books, and he kind of freshens up a lot of the ideas from Drucker. But that said, by the way, to conclude his book, he says something like, so now that you've read this book, he doesn't say it exactly like this, but basically, so now that you've read this book, what are you going to do on Monday? Yeah. And so I thought that was really, really good, because we read so much, we're absorbing so many ideas, and yet we end the book, we end the chapter, and then we go back to doing what we're going to do, which is a lot of the same old stuff. Whether it's in a business, I'm very, 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 I do this all the time. I just keep doing my same old thing, or in a classroom, I would say, because I don't know if there's all that many absolutely effective teachers out there. Maybe you guys see them more often than I do, even though I recruited quite a few teachers. But anyway,
why do you say that though? I'm curious. Why would you say that?
Well, I personally haven't met too many outstanding anything. I've interviewed thousands of teachers. I've interviewed thousands of people, probably on the order of 30,000 people, I would say. Of those, let's say 5,000 teachers, maybe more. Okay. And in that interview process, and this is various levels, by the way, obviously, history teachers, it could be substitute teachers, it could be, preschool teachers. So obviously a wide variety. Out of all those, there are very few that were outstanding. There were a lot of good ones, but not outstanding.
And
by the way,
what?
On that note of good to great, that's one of Jim Collins' books. You remember the absolute outstanding great teachers you in your own life and people that you've met, whether you worked with them, whether they were your teachers, but very, very few great outstanding ones. So in any field, by the way, it's not just teaching. Ruben?
I do want to say that just because you mentioned teachers, they can benefit from this book. So I'll just jump the gun and just say in two things that Drucker really emphasizes, and that is the issue of time and the issue of direct results. So time is so critical. If you so I was going to say the very next chapter deals with the management of time, how to consolidate it. The effective executive understands time. And it's such a special resource. It's a very unusual resource in a lot of ways. And so I'm going to have you answer, Jake, but I just want to say that if we manage time better and understand that we don't have a lot of it, that alone will, I believe, impact our teaching. And we could talk about direct results, but what are your thoughts, Jake?
A couple of things. I like that chapter, one of my favorites, Know Thy Time, right? And Drucker, he talks about an effective executive who looks at his day and does it by minutes. Like, how much time am I spending in these meetings? How many minutes am I spending with people who are in leadership and so forth? And so he realizes that he can't do it himself, so he has somebody else to do that for him. And he thought he didn't spend that much time, let's say, working with managers. And then he finds out that maybe that's all his time he's spending, and he's micromanaging them, making phone calls. And so then he goes, well, really? I'm spending that many hours doing that? And so it blew him away. So he started structuring his time differently and saying, wow, I need to spend more time over here and stop micromanaging my managers. And, and then once he did that, it changed really, the lives of these people. And so for me as a teacher, I looked at that chapter and I said, wow, I remember when I first started out, all my lesson plans were by minutes. I would say 10 minutes doing this, 15. I don't do that anymore. And now I'm realizing, oh, I need to do that again. I need to see where exactly I'm spending most of my time. Because once in a while, I'll tell the kids, I go, wow, have I been speaking too much today? And why am I asking them that? It's because in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, wait, I'm not managing my lecture to my activities very well. And so it really was a eye awakening, this chapter, to organize my day, my week with my lessons. And I think it's not a bad thing to go back and do that, manage your time, manage your day, so you can be more effective.
If I could jump in there, I worked for a Fortune 500 company, learning recruiting, and they were so honest as far as managing our time. So what we did, and you guys could, as teachers, you could easily do this during your prep time. What we had to do every single day, and I still carry this practice to this day, is for tomorrow's day, I end today's day with my prep time. That's what you guys call it. And I would plan out tomorrow's day. Okay, I'd spend about 15 minutes and I would just outline, what am I going to do tomorrow? 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Depends. It depends, right, on what your workflow is going to be. So you plan out every single minute, exactly what you're going to do. And then in the morning, you review that plan for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You review that and you make adjustments if there's any adjustments that need to be made. And then literally we had to stand up that in front of our boss, in front of the whole team, and say, this is what I'm going to do today. And at the end of the day, we would end with planning again. And by the way, he would make us stay if we didn't accomplish our goal for the day, which I rarely did because I needed to be successful back in those days in recruiting and learning. So, but when you're looking at your every single day, when you're looking at every single minute, saying, this is what I'm going to do today, and I'm going to have to stand up and be held accountable to it. Oh, you are going to make sure those things are done.
So let's put this into practice in real time, real world scenario. This week, I gave my benchmark to my students in terms of writing an essay. This is school information now. Now it's not in the classroom. Now school wants to see how my students are doing in their essays. And I told them, you have 30 minutes. Time starts now. What happens with the students changes because they don't have the luxury of looking at the ceiling, glancing at their phone. They're under the gun. And I tell them, this is 100 points, it's a quiz. You do not have discretionary time. It has to be focused. And then afterwards, we'll do some fun things. Oh, everything changes when you put the time constraint under your students, not just yourself. Have you seen that, Jacob?
Yeah, I agree, because it's real. Once you see it, and the kids, like you're mentioning, they're adjusting their day, not only adjusting, but they're looking at that. Wow, this is what we need to accomplish, and they look forward to the next activity, or they look forward to what they're going to get out of the next thing, and they're always looking ahead, right? Because they know when the bell rings. The kids are very aware of that. They get their backpacks ready, right? But if you are also guiding them to that backpack at the end of the day, that's the best thing, right? And I think he would say that's being an effective teacher. And when you mentioned, Ruben, and Chris, about teachers, that you haven't seen that many great teachers, I bet you those people would stand out to you if you saw that they were people who organize their day, organize their classroom that way. So being prepared, having activities, leading on to the next activity. Yeah, I just see that for sure.
But by the way, I'd also mention even their personal life, though, because and what I mean by that is preparing for your day so that you have a successful day. As an example, if you know you're supposed to be at work at in the classroom on campus, let's say at 7:45, well then, if you're showing up at 7:45, most likely you're going to have I mean, literally you're cutting it to the minute. You might not be having all that great of successful days because you're just coming in a stressful way. And yet, let's say you do stay after work. I hear a lot of teachers say that they stay after. That's fine. But literally, at the very least, that you planned your personal stuff, like your lunch, what time you're going to arrive, how do you have gas in your car? like I've heard so many excuses over the years of why someone is being fired or quitting because their boss was a tyrant about being on time or something silly like that. So I guess my point is this bleeds over into your personal life too,
Oh, yeah.
which really affects how your day is going to go and how you're going to be productive in this case in the classroom.
Yeah, Chris, I think my life changed when I started coming to work 30, 40 minutes early, just for me to just decompress, to get ready for the day and to make sure everything's there. If there were photocopies or if there were handout, whatever there was. But just mostly for me mentally to just breathe, to okay, this is my day. You know, as an introvert, it's tough to be on stage all day. I'm exhausted at the end of the day. And so to not be organized like that, oh yeah. And I think there are teachers, you see that there are teachers who do come in early for that. And I think it's more important to come in early than leave late. That's just me. But yeah, what do you think about that, Rube?
Well, it reminds me of the idea of Parkinson's law. I don't know if you guys have heard of this. Parkinson's law. It's work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion.
Mm.
In other words, if something must be done in a year, it'll be done in a year. If it must be done in 6 months, then it'll be done in 6 months. So
Yeah.
that's very critical when you're dealing with other people, because they will appreciate you if you allot certain time. Maybe not in the beginning, but they will find more free time, perhaps more time to do what they want to do in life. And it's very respectful if you manage that way. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I do want to mention. Oh, were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, definitely agree. Yeah.
I do want to mention, just because we spent time with it, that chapter is 2, Know Thy Time, as Jacob mentioned in it. He says, effective executives do not start with their tasks, they start with their time. And they do not start with planning, they start by finding out where their time actually goes. So we talked about first you record your time, then you manage it, and then you consolidate it. And that's the foundation of executive effectiveness. So there you have it in terms of that. So what would you say is another thing what is the most memorable part of the book for either of you?
Just let you go first.
Well, for sure, like I mentioned, how it ends, which is for me that was definitely the most memorable. But I would say right behind it, besides just getting things done, I would say that the whole idea of being useful and really contributing. Obviously, we've even I've talked to you guys on this podcast in the past with just that whole idea of being useful and contributing, and once again, even outstanding, being great. I really meant to watch the movie Stand and Deliver by the time we got here, just because obviously that is about a great teacher. But if we look around and we say, man, how do I really contribute? How can I truly be useful and even different? And it doesn't have to be different as in let's say Elon Musk different. It could be just absolutely whoever's in your sphere, really being useful to them, really being excellent. To me, I think even just asking that basic truth question of who am I? What can I contribute? What am I great at? He mentioned over and over again, and so does Jim Collins mentioned this, which is how do you, what are you going to be the best at? The world leader at? If you're gonna be in the Olympics as a teacher, what would you be performing at the very best at? And so I really feel like a lot of times we're looking at and he mentions this in the book also, focusing on your weaknesses. No, don't focus on your weaknesses. Focus on your strengths. Be great at something, and then once you're great at it, you're gonna know you're great at it. You might start dabbling in other areas, but really, really focusing in. If you're an excellent English teacher, then be even better. Don't start, teaching geometry as an example. Obviously, that's a huge difference in specialty. So
Yeah,
Very
that's
true.
good.
I want to underscore that idea of not focusing on your weaknesses. You're right. He mentions that. What are you good at? Keep improving that. Um, very, very true. Now, what were you going to say, Jacob? What's
No, I
your
mean, a couple things. One is he even goes further and says, know what your boss's strengths are. So you could look at those, and it maybe even when you communicate with them, not saying, hey, this is your strength, but just going to those strengths and his weaknesses, maybe taking those pieces if those are his weaknesses, right? Or working with him and where you kind of direct him a little bit to his strengths. And it has to be done very obviously very sensitive way. But you know, he speaks to that because we all have our strengths. Our bosses have their strengths, we have our strengths, our subordinates have their strengths. And so I think he values that. And sometimes there's so much to do. I mean, you can't change everything. You can't change your whole world, but you can change a couple of things that's in front of you, right? That you have to work with. And so why not do that? Like you mentioned that, Chris, right now, right? I mean, you just focus on one or two things, and what are you gonna be great at? Are you gonna be great at lecture? Are you gonna be great? You know, what piece of your teaching are you gonna be great at? So I think that's a good thing to remember.
and in a practical sense, so you can if you're not great at something, then maybe you can delegate that even in the classroom. You can delegate like you can get creative in delegating and building those strengths in another time, but keep doing what you do well.
Yeah.
So what about you, Jacob? What stood out to you in the book?
You know, I like
And
chapters.
and we could also after that we'll call on either of you to talk about an effective executive that you knew. But anyway, or that
That's good.
you,
Real quick. Last couple of chapters were on decision, how to make executive elements of decision making, and also effective decisions. So, on how to do that, how to make effective decisions. And so I'm going to put those two together. And there's, you know, he talks about he actually has a couple examples of people who made some really good decisions and some who didn't. One he talks about is not JFK, but FDR. And when before he became president, he had his whole plan on how he was going to handle the economy, right? I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then the stock market crash happened right before he became president. He goes, oh, I got to change my whole thinking on this. I'm looking at policy and the future regarding how our economy is going to look in the next 50 years, not just right now. And so he looked at the circumstances and he went with it. Where some people that happens and they go, oh shoot, I'm going to stick to my original plan. He talks about one of my favorite quotes is from Truman when he's talking about Eisenhower becoming president. He goes, oh, poor Ike, he's going to come into this White House and he's going to order people around, do this and do that, and they're not going to do it because he was a general and that's what they did. But as president, you have to remember that's a different job, different technique in how to talk to people. And he thought that Ike would have a tough time. And I think Ike did have actually a tough time with it. And then he also talks about the Schleifen plan and how this is the plan where the Germans said, hey, one day we're going to go to war. There'll be a great war, right? And this is how we're going to take over France and Russia, and we're going to send our soldiers this way. And that plan was like 25 years. Schleifen actually died before World War I. That happened way before the war started, and it didn't take into account how the world changed in the 20 years that Schleifen died, and that there was Belgium in between that had itself a little army that, you know, actually defended themselves against the Germans. And so that showed a lack of making a change when you could. And he talked about technology. You know, new technologies come about. I thought it was funny that he talked about the computer towards the end, and how it made me think, well, you know what? In my mind, it's the AI. Right now, AI is to me, it's like so distant. I don't know what that means. And I think that's what, and somebody who was reading this 50 years ago about the computer and how it could be effective, but how you could be effective with it, but also there's these question marks about it, right? And you can still become a great decision maker, and that being a tool. But that those two chapters really spoke to me, and the whole idea of, you know what, looking at being able to pivot, to make some changes when things come about that really blow your mind away. You're not even sure. Go ahead.
So I think the lesson for the teacher then is connected to what Chris said earlier, and that is don't just know what you're doing today, but know what you're doing tomorrow. And also, I think, know what you're doing next week, because it's not written in stone, but it's a, and maybe even communicate that with your students. Hey, this is where we're headed, but it's subject to change. You can pivot.
And I think sometimes our kids, they could get lost if there's a change. But if you practice that constantly, like, hey, I've done that a couple times. I come in and go, oh, you know what, we're gonna change our lesson today. We're gonna, this happened in the news. If I'm teaching economics, like, recently there's been some heavy things happening, right? Let's have a conversation on the stock market right now, or let's have a change on what's happening with the banks. Maybe that wasn't part of my lesson, but for me to not talk about it would be not criminal, but would be not a good thing. And so, yeah, Ruben, I think you have to pivot like that to and also teach those kids to learn that that's okay to do that. It's not everything's going to be exactly the way you had it. So I always have my lesson. I let my kids know my lesson the night before. I said, this is what we're going to do. So when we get to class, they've already seen it. And then I say, okay, oh, guess what? We're going to change it a little bit.
That's what, yeah, exactly. That's a good practice. But real briefly, I remember Dina Estrada told me once that she was in the middle of a lesson and she said, this isn't working. She told the students in the middle of the lesson, and she says, we're dropping this. She pivoted to something else. That's a good
teaching.
Okay, my favorite, of course, not only in the book, but maybe one of my favorite passages in all books, period. Page 44. In the same chapter, Know Thy Time. Another common time waster is malorganization. Its symptom is meetings. Meetings are by definition a concession of deficient organization. For one either meets or one works. One cannot do both at the same time. All I could say is read that page and the next one. It is great because it's a good way to think differently at meetings. And they're going to keep going because many people haven't read Drucker, but you could realize for me to get most benefit out of these meetings is to perform at a higher level so that these meetings are not relevant to me and they're for the next guy. And I could be doing something else while the meeting's going on. Meetings are a big time waster. He mentions some exceptions to that, but what about you guys as we start to wrap up? Have there been executives that you've known, bosses, admins, however you term them, that have been effective? Can you relate to that?
Well, for me, I know that I've had many principals. I think I counted it once. I've had at least 40 administrators, assistants, and principals. And one really stands out. His name is Herman Serta. I think he's an assistant to superintendent right now up north. But why he sticks out to me is because he was somebody I felt like was able to delegate things very well. He knew his strengths and I don't want to say his weaknesses, but things that weren't his strength. And one of his strengths was to basically talk to people and to guide them and to mentor them and to let them do their job. Once you mentor this person, let them do it and trust that they're going to do their job, whatever that job is. If it's teaching, if it's office work, whatever it is, he did that very well. And a big cheerleader and somebody who is positive and somebody who.
Well, it doesn't matter. Well, I mean, in relation to the book.
Yeah, well, no, I think in relation to the book.
Because in some ways, some executives are cheerleaders, others are not.
Right. But in relation to the book, though, the whole delegation piece, I felt like that's what made him special. And the book did talk about that and how you're able to do, if you're good at doing that, and because it's a time consumer, because he was able to look at his time and he knew that, whoa, my time is good at mentoring people and spending time there than doing meetings. He wasn't a meeting guy, and so he was somebody who looked at his day and he looked at what was important. And I felt like he really did build up his staff. That was what was important to him. And
the reason why I underscored the idea, oh, well, he's a cheerleader, maybe that's not as important, is because haven't you had admins that are cheerleaders and other teachers are rolling their eyes?
Right. Good point. And in this case, he wasn't, because he actually dived into their lives to make them better teachers, I think, by letting them teach, by not being that a micromanager right. Coming in and stressing staff out and things like that. And I could go on him, but he definitely was effective administrator.
What about you, Cris?
Well, I would definitely say what comes to mind right away is I spent a year in a construction office. And the reason I was there that long, because it was a big chaotic mess 99% of the time. But the reason I was there is because my boss there, she owned the company. She was an incredible specialist when it came to how to build any kind of building. She could build a house, she could build a it didn't matter. I mean, she literally ran circles around any single inspector that came our way. If there was a problem, she knew how to deal with it. And there were some incredibly difficult problems that an architect couldn't solve, that the city planner couldn't solve. She'd walk in, she'd get everyone together, and she would solve the problem. So it definitely was incredible to see that. She had a crazy long meetings, and I could tell you just major chaos. But I look back and why did I stay there? Why did I stay there? It was incredibly um, motivating to see someone so knowledgeable. It was just a lot of fun to work with her on that kind of stuff. A specialist.
You know what? Can I share something? With somebody that we all three worked with, there was an administrator that we were under, and she spent a whole day. I was told by a secretary this. She spent a whole day looking for the three of us because we were all out one day, and she said, "Mr. Aguilar," she made phone calls. She went to one of the sites. She was just like, "Where are these guys?" And we all called in that day because we went to a Dodger game opening day. And I thought to myself, what a waste of time looking for the three of us, three nutquets. But that was an example of not really managing her time very well. And she wasn't upset or anything. It's just like it just got to her like, what's going on? She wanted to know the the info. But anyway, I thought that was kind of funny.
I cease to see the relevance of this conversation to the
She
story,
wasted
but
time.
I will think. Well, I will. But
But
she
you
didn't
did
waste
enjoy
our-
that story, Chris.
but
You
she
enjoyed
wasted,
it, right?
She wasted her time. I don't know if she
That's what I
wasted.
said. She wasted time. She wasted her time.
Yeah.
That was not a good example of an administrator.
Don't you agree though that when an admin or an executive wastes our time, the people's time, that is critical too, right? That's what the issue of the meetings are about. So I think about my boss. I knew he was good. I just didn't know. I couldn't put a finger on it, and I think it's reading this book helps me understand him. And sometimes he would not respond to emails, and that meant no. He's not wasting your time with a long email. He knows, what his, after a while, we knew what no was. He would not respond to us when we asked. I didn't ask him, but he did not waste a lot of time. He told you one time to improve, maybe twice. There were not long meetings. You knew where you stood. Everybody knew who was going to be let go. They knew. And when he had something to say, to me. He came up to me after observing me, and he said, "Hey, there's a writer's workshop thing that I've used as a really good resource. You should check it out sometime if you want to." He wasn't even telling me to. He just said, "It was so good," and that's it. He could have sat down with me and taught it to me, but he encouraged me. The best non-time waster I have ever met for a boss, and everybody liked him. Maybe not everybody, but you know how that goes.
But I think some people like you, Sharon. They want right to the point. They don't want waste. They don't want you just go off on different tangents. And so,
I mean, think about all these people who had all these meetings, improve, and then got fired.
right.
Okay, so you fired me and you wasted my time with 1,000 meetings, right?
Yeah.
So
Good point.
Well, hence, at the very best, you're going to be a good teacher. You're not going to be a great teacher, because a great teacher is teaching. He's spending his 5 or 6 periods teaching, and the one period that he has to prep, he's prepping. He's prepping for the next day. He's getting things done, or she's getting things done today for tomorrow. They're not wanting to be in any kind of meeting. What meeting typically? I know there's these short meetings that you have to have for whatever reason, but yeah.
You guys aren't gonna believe, on Mondays we have our school meetings, and they decided this last year they decided to have 2 meetings on top of each other every Monday. So you just right away you shut off the teachers. They're really like, we're going to 2 different time killers, and where, as you guys know, most of these meetings could be done in 10 minutes or through email, so very frustrating.
Very good. The book is The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker. Chris, our brother, thank you for joining us for this episode.
Yes, thank you very much.
We're gonna ask you to come back on another time.
Maybe.
Maybe.
If he's interested.
He's interested. Yeah.
He's a married man now. His time is
How many months now, Chris? 6 months? Is that what it is?
It seems like just
10
a day.
years, huh? Okay, I'm sorry.
No.
Thank you,
It's
everybody,
been
for joining us. And we will see you next time. Goodbye.
Aloha. Bye-bye.